The late afternoon sun slipped quietly through the tall windows of Claire's house, filling the room with a soft golden warmth. She stood near the table, arranging a vase of daisies, the kind Daniel used to bring her every weekend before he passed away. 2 years had gone by since then, but some days the aches still felt new. The silence of the house was gentle, yet heavy, the kind that made even small sounds seem too loud. Ethan, her only son, had just returned home after finishing photography school in New York. The moment she saw him step through the door, tall and confident, carrying his camera bag and that easy smile, she felt something loosen in her heart. He looked so grown up now, a man ready to chase his dreams. And she wondered when her little boy had become someone who belonged more to the world than to her. He had been home for a few weeks, helping around the house, cooking dinners, sharing stories from the city. Claire loved listening to him. His words made the house feel alive again, like laughter had finally come back to stay. Yet she also noticed the way he looked at her sometimes, a mix of curiosity and quiet thought. She wasn't sure what he was seeing. One evening, as she was making tea, Ethan walked in, camera around his neck. "Mom," he said suddenly, "I need your help with something." She looked up, smiling. "With what? Laundry? Dishes?" He shook his head. "No, my final project. I want to photograph you." Claire froze for a second. "Me?" She let out a small laugh, the kind that hides disbelief. "Ethan, I think you're looking for a younger, prettier model." But he was serious. His voice softened. "No, Mom, I'm looking for someone real. My professors say a great photo tells a story, and you have one worth telling." She blinked, surprised by his tone. "Oh, Ethan, that's sweet, but I'm not," he interrupted gently. "Please. It's not about looking perfect. It's about showing truth, the kind of beauty that comes from living." His words caught her off guard. Claire had spent years hiding from cameras, avoiding mirrors, wearing soft colors that didn't draw attention. She wasn't ashamed of her age, but she didn't feel remarkable either. She felt invisible. But Ethan's eyes held no judgment, only sincerity. It reminded her of when he was a little boy, looking up at her as if she could do anything. "Let me think about it," she said quietly. That night, after he went to bed, Claire sat at her dressing table. The mirror reflected a woman she barely recognized, gentle lines around her eyes, silver threads in her brown hair, hands that had cared, cooked, cleaned, and comforted. She studied her face, remembering the girl she used to be, the one who used to dance barefoot in the kitchen with Daniel. For years, she had measured her worth by how well she held her family together. Now, with Daniel gone and Ethan grown, she didn't know who she was supposed to be anymore. She picked up an old photo of herself from the shelf, her wedding day, laughing in Daniel's arms. Her eyes in that picture were bright, alive, and unafraid. She touched the glass lightly and whispered, "Would you laugh if you saw me now?" In the quiet that followed, she realized how much she missed being seen. Not in a vain way, but in a human way. She wanted to feel visible again, to remember that she still mattered. The next morning, as Ethan made coffee, she walked into the kitchen and said simply, "All right, you can photograph me." Ethan's face lit up. "Really?" She nodded. "But only if you promise not to make me look strange with all those fancy filters." He laughed. "Deal. Just you, as you are." They decided to shoot in the backyard the next day. It was the same place where she used to watch Ethan build forts and chase fireflies, where Daniel had built the wooden swing that still hung from the old oak tree. When Ethan went out to set up his camera, Claire stood by the window watching him, feeling both nervous and curious. It had been years since she'd done anything that was just for herself. That night she couldn't sleep. She kept thinking about what it meant to be photographed, to let someone see not just your face, but your story. Part of her was afraid, not of the camera, but of what it might reveal. The sadness, the loneliness, maybe even the hope she'd buried under her routines. Morning came bright and warm. Claire put on a simple white dress, one she hadn't worn in years. It wasn't fancy, but it made her feel like herself again. Ethan smiled when he saw her. "You look beautiful, Mom." She rolled her eyes lightly. "You're biased." He raised his camera. "I'm honest." At first, she didn't know where to look or how to stand. Her hands fidgeted, her smile felt uncertain. Ethan guided her gently, never once asking her to pose. "Just look toward the sun," he said. "Let the light do the rest." As the shutter clicked, something strange happened. The nervousness faded. The warmth of the sun touched her face, and a breeze played with her hair. She closed her eyes for a moment and thought of Daniel, his laughter, his promises, the life they'd built together. And when she opened them again, she wasn't thinking about how she looked. She was simply feeling. When Ethan lowered the camera, he said softly, "That's the one." "The one what?" She asked. "The photo that tells your story." Later, when he showed her the pictures, she hesitated before looking. But when she finally did, her breath caught. The woman in those images wasn't someone broken by time. She was strong, gentle, and full of quiet light. Her eyes held memories, yes, but also grace. For the first time in years, Claire didn't feel like a widow or a background figure in someone else's life. She felt like herself, seen, valued, alive. That evening, as the sky turned orange, Ethan uploaded a few photos to his computer. Claire stood behind him, watching the screen glow with her image. He turned to her and said, "You see what I see now?" She smiled softly. "I think I'm beginning to, but deep inside." She didn't know that saying yes to that one photograph would soon lead her somewhere unexpected, toward people, emotions, and moments that would change her life again. Because sometimes the simple act of being seen can open a door you never knew was waiting for you. And for Claire, that door had just begun to open. The next morning came with clear skies and soft lights spilling across the backyard. The old oak tree stood tall as always, its branches whispering in the wind. That was where Ethan decided they would start. He set up his camera, tested the angles, and checked how the sunlight fell on the grass. Claire stood nearby, holding a cup of tea, trying not to show how nervous she was. It had been years since anyone pointed a camera at her for real. Ethan looked up with a reassuring smile. "You don't need to pose, Mom," he said gently. "Just be yourself. Talk to me if that helps." She gave a small nod and set her cup down. The light breeze brushed her hair as she stood under the oak tree, where so many of her memories lived, where Daniel had once proposed, where Ethan had played as a boy, where countless summer evenings were filled with laughter and warmth. Now it was quiet, but not empty. Ethan lifted the camera and began taking photos. Each click echoed softly through the backyard. At first, Claire felt awkward, unsure of what to do with her hands, where to look, how to stand. She gave a half smile, then looked away quickly, blushing a little. "Relax," Ethan said, lowering the camera for a moment. "Pretend it's just us talking. Forget the cameras here." Claire took a deep breath and looked up toward the sunlight breaking through the leaves. "You always make things sound easy," she said softly. He smiled. "That's my job." As he raised the camera again, Claire let her thoughts wander. The warmth of the sun reminded her of Daniel's hand holding hers on a spring morning long ago. She thought of their first home, of Ethan as a baby laughing in her arms, of birthdays, laughter, tears, all the small, beautiful moments that made a life full. And in that quiet reflection, she stopped thinking about how she looked. Ethan noticed. He began clicking faster now, moving around her quietly. He wasn't just taking a picture, he was capturing something real. After a while, he said softly, "You look beautiful when you're thinking of Dad." Claire froze. "You can tell." Ethan nodded. "I can see it in your eyes. You don't have to smile, it's already there." For a moment, silence filled the air. Claire's heart tightened, but not in pain, in something bittersweet. She looked at her son and realized how much of Daniel lived on in him. "Maybe that's why this feels right," she said quietly. "He would have liked this." Ethan lowered the camera and smiled. "Then let's keep going." They continued through the morning. She sat on the swing Daniel had built, let the breeze move her hair, and even laughed when Ethan told her silly stories to make her relax. The laughter came easily, like it had just been waiting to return. When they finished, Ethan showed her a few shots on his camera screen. Claire hesitated before looking, but when she did, She went completely still. The photos didn't show an aging widow or a tired woman. They showed light, soft, real, and full of feeling. Her expression wasn't perfect, but it was alive. In some, she looked thoughtful. In others, she looked like someone remembering love, not loss. She whispered, "Is that really me?" Ethan nodded. "That's how I see you." Something inside her cracked open, not from sadness, but from warmth. She realized how long it had been since she saw herself this way, not through the eyes of age or grief, but through love. Later that day, they sat in the kitchen with sandwiches and coffee, laughing about how awkward the first few minutes had been. Ethan edited a few photos, adjusting brightness and color. Claire sat beside him, watching her own reflection shift gently on the screen. Asterisk. "You know," she said, "I thought I'd look old or strange in these pictures. But I don't." He grinned. "That's because you stopped hiding." She chuckled softly. "Maybe I finally stopped caring what other people think." Ethan looked at her, serious now. "You shouldn't care. You've lived through things that made you who you are. That's what beauty really is, Mom. Not the way someone looks, but the story behind their eyes." His words stayed with her long after he said them. She went to bed that night thinking about how much her son had grown, how wise he sounded, how Daniel would have been proud. For the first time in a long while, she felt peace, like something that had been closed inside her heart had quietly opened again. Over the next few days, Ethan continued taking pictures. Some were candid or watering plants, reading by the window, or baking cookies. Others were quiet portraits, her hands folded gently, her eyes lost in thought. He wasn't trying to make her look glamorous. He was showing her the way love and time could coexist beautifully. One afternoon, while reviewing the final collection, Ethan looked at her and said, "I want to share one of these." "Share?" she asked, raising an eyebrow. "Yes," he said. "On my photography page? Just one. I think people need to see it." Claire hesitated. "Oh, Ethan, I don't know. What if people say something unkind?" He smiled. "They won't. I think they'll see what I see." She studied his face. There was no pressure, just quiet pride. After a moment, she sighed softly and said, "All right, just one." Ethan chose the photo where she stood beneath the sunlight. Eyes closed, her face turned gently toward the light. Calm, peaceful, and strong. He uploaded it that evening with a simple caption, "The strength of time, my mother." Claire didn't think much about it afterward. To her, it was just a nice gesture from her son, a small personal thing between them. But to Ethan, it was more than a photo. It was a message about love, memory, and finding beauty in the moments we forget to notice. That night, when he showed her the post, she smiled at the kind comments already appearing beneath it. People wrote things like, "This picture feels like love, and she looks peaceful. Like she knows something the rest of us don't." Claire shook her head, half laughing, half blushing. "People are too kind. They don't even know me." Ethan smiled softly. "Maybe they don't have to. Sometimes a photo tells them everything." Claire looked again at the image on the screen. For the first time in years, she didn't see loss. She saw a story, her story full of love, strength, and quiet grace. She felt something stir inside her, something she hadn't felt since before Daniel passed away. Hope she didn't know it yet. But that one photograph would soon travel far beyond her backyard and bring someone new into her life, who would see her the same way Ethan did. Because sometimes, a simple picture doesn't just capture a moment, it changes everything that comes after. The portrait of Claire standing beneath the golden light of her backyard oak tree soon became one of Ethan's favorite photos. It was simple yet powerful, her eyes closed, her hair slightly moved by the wind, her face calm but full of emotion. When he looked at it, he didn't just see his mother. He saw strength, love, and a quiet kind of courage that many people overlook. One evening, while editing photos on his laptop, Ethan decided to upload that picture to his online photography portfolio. He titled it, "The Strength of Time, My Mother." He didn't expect much to happen. It was just another post, one of many in his growing collection. But within hours, comments started coming in. People wrote things like, "There's something deeply peaceful about her expression. She looks like she's remembering someone she loved." This photo made me cry. It feels real. By the next morning, the post had hundreds of likes and shares. People began tagging their friends, writing about their own mothers, their own stories of love and loss. The portrait touched something universal, the quiet beauty of time and memory. Claire didn't know about it until Ethan showed her the page. When she saw all the kind messages, she blushed and said softly, "Oh dear. I didn't think anyone would care about an old woman standing in her backyard." Ethan smiled. "They care because they see something honest, Mom. You gave them something real." She looked at the screen again, her eyes warm but uncertain. "I just hope they see more than the wrinkles." "They do," Ethan said. "They see you." A few days later, as Ethan was checking his emails, one message stood out among the usual notifications. It was from someone named Michael Turner, an art curator from Seattle. The subject line read, "Regarding your portrait, the strength of time." Ethan opened it immediately. The message was short but sincere. Michael explained that he was curating a photography exhibition called The Beauty of the Everyday, and he wanted to feature Ethan's portrait of Claire. He believed it perfectly captured the theme, finding grace in ordinary life. And love in the traces time leaves behind. Ethan almost couldn't believe it. He ran to the kitchen where Claire was making coffee. "Mom, you're going to be in an art exhibition." She laughed, thinking he was joking. "Don't be silly." He handed her the phone. She read the message slowly, her eyes widening. "He wants to display it in a gallery." Ethan nodded. "Yes, in Seattle." He said it moved him. For a moment, she didn't know what to say. The idea of strangers staring at her face on a wall felt strange. "Oh, Ethan, I'm not sure. I don't want people looking at me like I'm something to be studied." He smiled gently. "They won't be looking at you, Mom. They'll be seeing what I see, what you showed me that day. They'll see love, strength, and life. That's what makes it art." Claire hesitated. But there was something in her son's voice, a kind of belief that she hadn't felt in herself for a long time. Finally, she nodded. "All right then. If you think it's right, Kay." A month later, they traveled to Seattle for the exhibition. Claire hadn't been on a trip in years. She bought a simple blue dress and borrowed a scarf from her friend. As the plane landed, she looked out the window at the gray sky and whispered, "Daniel, I wish you could see this." The gallery was beautiful, tall white walls, soft lights, and quiet music playing in the background. People moved slowly, talking in low voices, studying the photographs hung neatly in rows. And then, near the center of the room, Claire saw it, her own portrait. Printed large, framed with care, glowing under the light. For a moment, she couldn't move. Her throat tightened, her hands trembled slightly. It was her face, yes, but it didn't feel like vanity or pride. It felt like a memory, one that belonged not just to her, but to everyone who had loved and lost, who had kept going despite time. Ethan placed a hand on her shoulder. "You did this, Mom," he said softly. As she stood there, a man approached, tall, kind eyes, with silver at his temples. He smiled warmly and said, "You must be the woman in the photograph." Claire nodded shyly. "Yes, I suppose I am." He extended his hand. "Michael Turner." The curator shook his hand. "It's a pleasure to meet you. I wasn't expecting all this." He looked at the portrait for a long moment, then turned back to her. "When I first saw this picture online, I stopped scrolling. It felt like it was speaking directly to me. There's a kind of peace in your expression, like someone who has lived through storms but still believes in sunlight." His words made her smile gently. "That's kind of you to say. I didn't plan to look peaceful that day. I was just remembering someone I loved." Michael's eyes softened. "That's exactly why it's so powerful. It's honest." They talked for a while about photography, art, and how moments of real emotion are rare to capture. Ethan watched from a few steps away, smiling quietly. He could tell there was something about the way Michael looked at his mother, not with admiration for the photo, but with respect for the person in it. Later that evening, as the event ended, Michael walked them to the exit. "Thank you for allowing your portrait to be part of this," he said. "It reminded people what real beauty looks like." Claire smiled. "Thank you for seeing it that way." When they left the gallery, the night air was cool and crisp. The city lights shimmered across the water. Claire felt lighter than she had in years. Something inside her had shifted. She wasn't just someone's mother or widow anymore. She was someone whose story had touched hearts she'd never met. That night, in the hotel, she couldn't sleep. She kept thinking of what Michael had said. The way he looked at her photograph like it meant something personal to him. She didn't know why, but his presence had stirred something quiet inside her. Not romance exactly, but a kind of connection she hadn't felt in so long. When she closed her eyes, she thought of Daniel, smiling at her from the past, as if to say, "It's okay to keep living." She whispered into the dark, "Maybe it is." And though she didn't realize it then, that single meeting, that simple photograph, had already begun writing a new chapter in her life. Because sometimes beauty doesn't end where time begins to show. Sometimes it's just the beginning of being seen again. The weeks after the exhibition were filled with quiet surprises. Claire returned home to her peaceful town, but something inside her had changed. The image of her portrait hanging under bright gallery lights stayed with her. She had gone to Seattle thinking she was just supporting her son, but she came back realizing she had rediscovered a part of herself she thought was gone. Ethan noticed the change immediately. She smiled more, hummed while cooking, and even started dressing up for her morning walks again. There was a softness in her that had nothing to do with sadness. It was light returning after a long winter. Then, one evening while Claire was sorting through mail, she found a small envelope addressed in neat handwriting. Inside was a note. "Dear Claire, I hope this letter doesn't feel intrusive. Meeting you at the exhibition was an unexpected gift. Your portrait reminded me that beauty doesn't fade with time. It deepens. I'd love to stay in touch if you'd allow it." She read the note twice. There was nothing romantic or forward in it, just warmth and respect. Still, it made her heart flutter, not because of what it said, but because of what it meant. Someone had truly seen her, not as a mother, not as a widow, but as a woman still capable of new beginnings. That night she showed the letter to Ethan. He grinned. "He's the curator, right? The one who loved your photo." Claire nodded. "Yes." He was kind, thoughtful. "Then maybe write back," Ethan said casually. "It's just a letter." So she did. She thanked Michael for his kind words, mentioned how meaningful the exhibition had been, and signed it simply, "Warm regards, Claire." Days passed, then weeks, and slowly their letters turned into emails, then calls. Their conversations flowed easily: art, books, travel, life. Michael told her about his quiet life in Seattle, how he'd lost his wife years ago and had never really let anyone in since. Claire listened, understanding that loneliness without judgment. She told him about Daniel, about raising Ethan, about the silence that used to fill her evenings. For the first time in years, she spoke freely, not as someone remembering the past, but as someone learning to live again. Every message from Michael felt gentle and steady, like sunlight through a window. And though neither of them used big words like love or romance, there was a quiet care between them that didn't need naming. Months later, Michael visited her town for a small art event. When he called to say he'd arrived, Claire found herself nervous. Not the kind of nervous that comes with fear, but the kind that comes with hope. When she met him outside the cafe near the town square, it felt natural, like meeting an old friend. He brought her a single white rose. "I remembered it was in your garden," he said softly. She smiled. "You have a good memory?" They talked for hours about everything and nothing. When he spoke, she noticed the calm in his voice, the way he looked at her like time didn't matter. And when she laughed, really laughed, he said, "You should do that more often. The world needs to hear it." That evening, Ethan came home to find his mother glowing. "You saw him, didn't you?" he asked, grinning. She tried to act casual. "He's just a friend, Ethan." "Sure," he said teasingly. "A friend who makes you blush." She rolled her eyes but smiled. Deep down, she knew it was more than friendship. It was connection, gentle, unexpected, and kind. Over the following months, Michael visited often. Sometimes he'd bring her books or flowers. Other times, they'd just sit under the oak tree and talk. Claire felt no rush, no pressure. She liked that he never tried to fill Daniel's place. He simply made space for new memories. Ethan, watching from a distance, couldn't have been happier. You know, he said one evening, that photo didn't just change my career, it changed your life. Claire looked at him, eyes soft. It gave me permission to live again. Spring came early that year. The garden bloomed brighter than before, as if even nature had decided to start over. One afternoon, Michael invited her for a walk through the park. The air was warm, and the cherry blossoms drifted like pink snow. They stopped near a small pond, the water shimmering with sunlight. Michael turned to her and said quietly, "Do you ever think about how some moments find us when we're not looking for them?" She smiled. "All the time." He hesitated, then continued, "Meeting you reminded me that it's never too late to begin again. You make me want to try." Claire looked at him for a long moment. She didn't need grand words or promises. All she said was, maybe we both needed to be found. They stood in silence, watching the petals fall. There was peace in that stillness, not the emptiness of before, but a gentle calm that comes from healing. That night, back home, she sat by her window, watching the moonlight pour across the floor. Ethan came in quietly and placed a hand on her shoulder. "You seem happy, Mom," he said. She nodded. "I am." He smiled. "Dad would be glad." Her eyes filled softly, but there were no tears this time. "So am I," she whispered. Weeks later, Michael invited her to Seattle again, this time not for an exhibition, but just to visit. She said yes. They spent days walking through galleries, quiet cafes, and by the harbor, where the air smelled of salt and new beginnings. On their last day together, he brought her to a small garden behind an art museum. In the center stood a framed photograph, her portrait. Printed smaller now, but still glowing in that soft sunlight. "I wanted to keep this here," Michael said. "It reminds people that beauty doesn't disappear with age. It just changes shape." Claire looked at the photo, then at him. "You've taught me that too." He reached for her hand and she didn't pull away. They stood together, surrounded by the quiet hum of the city, both knowing that this moment, simple and real, was enough. When she returned home, Ethan met her at the door. "How was it?" he asked. Claire smiled. "It was ... lovely." He grinned knowingly. "You're glowing again," she laughed. "Maybe I just finally stepped into the light." That evening, as the sun set, she walked to the oak tree and sat on the old swing. The same place where Daniel once asked her to share a life, where Ethan had captured her rediscovering herself, now became a place of peace again. She looked toward the fading light and whispered, "Thank you for every chapter, for every photograph, for every second chance," because she finally understood. Sometimes life doesn't give us one great love story, it gives us many small ones, each helping us find our way back to ourselves. And as the last light of day wrapped around her, Claire smiled, not for the past, not for what was lost, but for what she had found once more. The light, after all, had never truly left. It had just been waiting for her to face it again.